And now, introducing John Cena! Thank you. Wait, what's wrong? Brad, they can't see me again. What is going on, guys? So today we are back with another Jungle Cup video. Today we're actually going to be talking about team building. Woo! So, as I've stated plenty of times in the past, this is probably one of my favorite aspects of actually participating in PvP. Actually sitting down and thinking about teams and like trying to build an optimal team. Not necessarily using meta Pokemon every single time, but definitely like covering weaknesses and like the whole rock, paper, scissors aspect of team building is always really fun for me. So today I have a simple little formula that I think will perform fairly well in this cup. Based on the 4 typings that we do have a fairly simplistic approach to building a team this month. It's not super crazy. It's not actually like super in-depth. It's kind of the same as last month, but either way. So we're actually going to start with talking about our team composition, our 6 different slots, and what role I think most of these slots are actually supposed to be good for. Our first slot is actually going to be Vigoroth here, which Vigoroth is the king of the jungle, duh. So Vigoroth, of course, as we've talked about plenty of times already in this cup, Vigoroth just has an amazing amount of numbers that he puts up. He has counter, he has body slam. He then has access to some other type moves that kind of give him a little bit of flexibility, whether it's Brick Break to help target the normal types, whether it's Bulldoze to help target the electric types. Like you actually have that added benefit, but you don't necessarily need it. So not only is he kind of cost efficient in a lot of ways, but he can kind of be like an extra little oomph on top of that if you want to invest in that second move. But all around Vigoroth, solid pick. I think most people are going to be running a Vigoroth. In the budget video that we do this month, we may actually try to like build some teams that don't have Vigoroth just for the fun of it. Because I can think like maybe Heracross or Breloom would be an interesting like just fighting type to really go up against, but it's kind of hard to replace Vigoroth in this cup. Our next slot is actually going to be our Anti-Vigoroth, which of course Anti-Vigoroth is going to be good at attacking our Vigoroth here. So basically this role needs to just be good at taking out Vigoroth. It's kind of the main shtick of this role. Things like Breloom, things like Heracross do really well here. Basically if you have fighting type damage to go up against the Vigoroth, it's going to do really well. Breloom and Heracross actually have an added benefit because they do actually resist some of the counter damage flat out of the gate, which is always great. So an anti-Vigoroth pick definitely is going to be needed if 90% of the people that are participating this month run a Vigoroth. Definitely want to have something to actually counter that Vigoroth. And of course some other options for our Anti-Vigoroth. Of course the grass types do really well here. And of course being like pretty much uncontested with fire type moves, you're basically just going to be looking out for the bugs. So with that in mind, you can kind of do pretty well up against the Vigoroth with grass types and pretty much only have to worry about the bug type weakness, which actually kind of starts a trend here. So our next slot is actually the Flyer. And the Flyer is actually good at taking out most of these anti-Vigoroth options. Outside of like Vespiquen, Vespiquen's kind of a more obscure anti-Vigoroth pick, but it definitely could work in some scenarios. But outside of that, most of your anti-Vigoroth picks like Breloom and Heracross are going to have a big weakness to the flying type damage. So a flying type Pokemon in this cup is going to be really strong. Now ideally, the best Flyer, as we've previously determined just based off my research, is probably going to be Knocked Out. It just puts up insane good numbers. It has an insanely high stamina stat. It's all around just one of the best Pokemon to use this month, and I definitely feel like a flying type is going to be needed this month, which actually ends up bringing us to our Anti-Flyer. Yeah, so our Anti-Flyer, of course, is going to be good at taking out the Flyer. Now, this actually has a little bit more flexibility than previous roles where, like, you can have maybe an Alolan Graveler, Golem, whichever one you prefer there. You could have Raichu, you could have Magneton, you could have Magnezone. Like, as long as it's good at taking out the flying types, you're going to be pretty solid. Now, personally, I do kind of lean more towards like a Alolan Graveler and a Alolan Golem here, and out of those two, I definitely do lead a little bit more towards Alolan Golem, of course, but I think that those would actually make a tad bit more sense, not because they're actually really good against the Flyers, but because they're actually going to put up a lot more help in the bug type matchups as well. I definitely think that they're going to be really good for that. So I definitely feel like those are probably my preferred picks for the anti-Flyer. But in general, like if it has access to electric type moves, it's going to be great. If it has access to rock type moves, probably going to be a little bit better. So now our next spot here actually starts to break the mold. We're actually going to have a flex spot. And out of this flex spot, I really think you should kind of prioritize just a really good generalist. A Pokemon that is actually really good at covering tons of things, possibly having very little weaknesses in the cup, possibly having a lot of output just as far as damage goes, and just being able to just run over a lot of things. Just in general, just a really good generalist. The first one that usually comes to mind is Fortress, possibly even Scizor this month, because they do have that reduced weakness in, you know, the fire typing. There's not that many fire type moves running around this month, so definitely Fortress and Scizor. And then there are a couple of other bugs that do really good as generalists this month, which I think possibly could do really well. But other than that, I definitely think that the flex spot should just really be a good generalist to help you cover things that you kind of aren't expecting. And especially these 4 slots right here are pretty narrow. I mean, Vigoroth, yeah, he's a pretty big generalist, don't get me wrong. But an Anti-Vigoroth is really going to be only good at pretty much taking out Vigoroth. It's going to have very little utility outside of that. The Flyer generally will be okay. Like, I feel like a flying type Pokemon will be a decent generalist, but its main goal is to take out the Anti-Vigoroth. And then our Anti-Flyer is really probably not going to be a great generalist, but it is going to do really well up against our Flyer. So we're kind of like really narrow right here, and I think that a really good generalist will just help with the overall effectiveness of your team, because you're going to be able to cover a little bit more area of attack with your generalist here. And then our last spot here is actually our coverage spot. I definitely want to cover our tail here. So the problem with running this kind of like setup here is that it's going to leave us open to pretty much what everybody else is running. So depending on which Pokemon you choose here, we actually have some coverage that we need to gain back. So let's say if our Anti-Vigoroth has a super duper weakness to flying type, and then let's say our Flyer has a super duper weakness to rock type damage. So we have a really bad weakness to flying and a really bad weakness to rock. We kind of need to start looking at the like effectiveness chart and try to figure out which Pokemon to really put into our team to try to help cover the Pokemon that are going to be running either rock type moves or flying type moves. Possibly could start to give us some problems. If we don't look at that, we could have a pretty big hole in our team. For the actual team building aspect here, let's actually talk about a few Pokemon. We'll run through just kind of like a mock-up team that I've made and try to talk a little bit about the roles and the moves that we're actually getting used for this team, and try to figure out like which Pokemon I kind of want to run this month. So of course our first slot is going to be Vigoroth, with no doubt in our mind. If we're running this formula here, definitely going to have to choose Vigoroth. Now I personally think that Counter, Body Slam, and Brick Break will work out best for me, and that will be discussed a little bit later on when we get to our flex spot down here. But in general, Bulldoze, like we talked about in the deep dive, does put up a couple of better numbers. Brick Break is actually just going to generally help us up against the other normal type Pokemon that are out there. With either move, it kind of just like, it really sucks that we only have Bulldoze or Brick Break, because up against the flying types it doesn't really help us any. We do heavily rely on that Body Slam anyways, but it's even more so in those scenarios. But outside of that, the other normal type Pokemon that possibly could be running around, Brick Break will definitely help us a lot there. There's not going to be too many of those, of course. Like, possibly I can see somebody going for like Munchlax to try to be cheeky. Maybe Porygon if they're feeling like super ballsy and they want to try to use that hidden power. I mean, I could see people trying to do that, but in general, I kind of feel like Brick Break would be a nice move to just have. Our next pick for our Anti-Vigoroth here is actually going to be Heracross. So you guys know I'm a huge bug fan. Heracross is like top 3 favorite bug and I can't choose Breloom over Heracross. That would be like stabbing my brother. I just can't do that. So with Heracross here, we're going to have counter. That's our main goal of getting rid of Vigoroth. We're actually going to have Mega Horn, which does help us up against the grass types and just kind of the other anti-Vigoroth counters as well. And then we do have close combat, which, as we determined in the deep dive, it kind of does end up performing just a bit better than Earthquake, just because kind of Earthquake is just so slow. It just kind of depends on which route you want to take it. Other than that, the other Pokemon that I do have ground type move on, I kind of feel like will alleviate some of the Earthquake from Heracross, and I think this other Pokemon will do a lot better with Earthquake in general. Our next spot is our Flying type, and for the Flying type, I'm definitely going to have to go with Noctowl here. In the Versus video where we took all of the normal Flying types, it performed by far the best. And then in the Versus video where we actually compared it just directly to Pidgeot, which is the next best thing in my opinion, Noctowl still definitely outperformed against Pidgeot. Pidgeot does have the win up against Noctowl, but in general, Noctowl is just going to dominate most of the Pokemon that are going to be weak to the Flying type. Definitely going to go with Wing Attack, Sky Attack, and Nightshade, just like we did in the actual Versus videos, everything like that. That's definitely going to be our strongest moveset here, and I mean, outside of that, there's not a whole lot that you can really say on top of Noctowl. He's just going to be great at what he does, taking out the Heracross, the Breloom, and he's just going to be really good. Now, on top of our Flying type, we need an Anti-Flyer, and like I mentioned earlier, I definitely think that Alolan Golem is probably going to be one of the most interesting picks and probably a great pick in general, but definitely my favorite pick this month. Rock Throw, Wild Charge, and Rock Blast are going to be insanely good. Rock Throw and Rock Blast just kind of there to help take out the Flyers, especially I really want to use Scyther. Like, if I could use Scyther, I want to find a way to use it, but the people that want to run like Scyther and Masquerain and things like that, they're gonna get like completely annihilated because they do have that super duper weakness to the rock type moves. So Rock Throw, Rock Blast definitely going to help out a lot there. Wild Charge definitely going to be the backup or probably the main charge move that we actually end up using, just because it has an insane damage output. Up against the Flyers, I mean, Alolan Golem is just going to tear through them no problem. Now for our flex spot, this is kind of where my ground type move comes in. I definitely think that Fortress is probably going to be the better bet for me. Bug Bite, Rock Tomb, and then Earthquake here. So the reason that I think that Fortress would probably be better for Earthquake on this team instead of Heracross is because Heracross is going to be a little squishy. It's going to kind of fall apart if it gets up against the wrong Pokemon. It's just going to flake out, and it's probably not even going to get the energy up to actually fire Earthquake. So I definitely feel like Fortress would be a little bit better in that regard, considering that we only have a weakness to fire. Even though it's a super duper weakness, there's not going to be a whole lot of fire running out around there, and you can pretty much go uncontested with your typing and probably take neutral damage at worst against like 99% of the cup. And I feel like Earthquake would be a lot safer bet on Fortress rather than Heracross, because I'd probably get to Earthquake and I'd probably get to Earthquake and I'd still probably be able to fire it in a reasonable amount of time compared to Heracross. So I definitely feel like Fortress is going to be a really, really good flex option in this cup. And for me personally, I think Earthquake makes a lot more sense for this specific team. And then for our coverage slot here, I actually whipped up a little something to help us choose. I actually don't have one written down on my paper here, but I do actually have a spreadsheet, which I will of course link down in the comments below. This is a spreadsheet that it's going to be separate from the PvP spreadsheet, but of course you guys, it'll have instructions. Well, let's just actually walk through that right now. Alright, so in the description, as soon as you click on this link, you're actually going to go straight to the spreadsheet and you're going to be presented with this welcoming sheet. So it basically just says, hello there, welcome to the coverage checker. To use this spreadsheet for yourself, please do the following. Click File, make copy, name the sheet whatever you want to, choose where you want to save the sheet, hit OK, and then Sheets will load the sheet directly for you. So now if you're doing this on mobile, it'll be a tad bit different. The directions that are actually listed here are straight for like desktop users. If you want to do this on mobile, as soon as you get the Sheets app up, if you hit the menu button here, you say Share and Export on the right hand side, hit Make a Copy. We're just going to call it Coverage Checker. It'll make a copy for us. And then of course it should open up the sheet directly there for us. So once we go to coverage, you can actually see here, I have a couple of Pokemon already pre-put in here. Basically, this is gonna actually help you visualize the weaknesses and the strengths of your team. So as you can see in the first slot, we do have Vigoroth, then we do have Noctowl, then we do have Heracross, just like we were talking about. Then I actually have Flygon. So the reason that I chose those 4 Pokemon to start you off with specifically, Vigoroth, you can see, basic normal type, only has 1 typing. You can see fighting type, you're gonna take 1.6 times damage, whereas ghost type, you're gonna resist it pretty hardcore, which actually ends up being a 0.391 on the damage. So you can kind of see how that simulates that there. Noctowl, you can see, is a normal and flying type Pokemon, so you can see it actually does take into account both typings, and you can see its damage either received from those specific typings. Heracross, Bug, and Fighting, the reason that we choose that is because it actually does have a super duper weakness to the flying type moves. And as you can see there, 2.560 times damage, which is pretty gnarly. You can see though, we do have a pretty good resistance up against the fighting with a 0.625 damage, which is always nice. And then Flygon here, I know it has nothing to do with the Jungle Cup, but I did want to illustrate. As you can see, Flygon actually like triple resists. It does a super duper duper resistance to the electric typing, which actually talks it down all the way to a 0.244 amount of damage that it would receive versus that 1.0, which is normal type damage. Based on this spreadsheet, let's actually try, we'll do Vigoroth, Noctowl, Heracross, just like we talked about. Now on the Flygon here, we're just gonna hit our down arrow, and you can either search through the list like this, or you can just kind of hit the keyboard icon there. We're gonna bring over our Golem, and the way that it's listed is Golem with Alola in parentheses there. And then we do have our Fortress, so we will type in Fortress, and you can see it auto-completes us there. Okay, so our 6th slot is the one that we're worried about here. So let's actually take a look at the big picture here. We have a super duper weakness to flying, a super duper weakness to ground, and then a super duper weakness to fire. Well, out of those 3, the only one that's actually like a really big problem is probably going to be the flying there. Because Alolan Golem actually is going to probably go uncontested with a lot of Pokemon in the ground type moves. There's not too many ground type moves out there rolling around. I mean, there are definitely a few, but the ones that are like relevant, like Fortress using Earthquake, Heracross possibly having Earthquake, Vigoroth having Bulldoze. I mean, Vigoroth going up with Alolan Golem is probably going to be an annihilation either way, but the ground type moves aren't going to be as prevalent. Fortress kind of runs into the same situation where fire types aren't going to be hardly prevalent at all as well, because the hidden power users are kind of underwhelming, and then we have what, like Manectric, which that's about it. So I'd say that the flying type is definitely probably going to be our bigger problem out of those 3 super duper weaknesses. So I definitely think an electric type would do pretty well here. Now, first thing that comes to mind is possibly doing like Magneton or Magnezone, but let's actually type that in really fast, and we'll actually see. If we do Magnezone here, you can see that does add a super duper weakness to ground as well. Do we feel comfortable of going a super duper weakness to ground here? Do we think that it would be that big of a deal, or that small of a deal to be okay? Possibly, but let's actually just choose a different option just for the sake of doing it here. Let's actually just choose Raichu, regular Raichu of course. We could actually have that. We do drop the super duper weakness to our ground type. We only have a single weakness to ground type there. What if we actually did the Alolan form though? Let's see what that does. It's kind of interesting. It does add a few weaknesses to it, but it also gives us a stronger resistance up against fighting, which is kind of nice because that means we actually have both Heracross and we have Raichu that would resist the fighting there. While Raichu actually is going to be helping us up against the flying types, it could, in a pinch, it could actually help save us up against some fighting type damage from either Vigoroth or the Anti-Vigoroth option. So that could be interesting. So for the sake of this video, let's actually just go with Alolan Raichu here. We're not gonna drag this out too much further. I definitely think that the spreadsheet possibly could help you just visually see your weaknesses and your strengths inside of your team. If you want to use that, of course, it is going to be linked in the comments down below. I'll pin the link, and that way you guys can go use it for yourselves if that's what you so desire. So that is about it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. I really think that the team building aspect of this month is quite interesting, but I always think that, so I can't really like say that's profound or anything, but I think that this formula will give you a pretty good start. Of course, this is just a weak rubber mold. You can shape it and form it however best fits your need. And of course, there are a plethora of Pokemon that I did not even like mention in this video, but you can definitely use those as well. And they kind of roughly fit into this same type format, which I think will pretty much be a lot of people's team this month. And if you leave out certain aspects, like if you left out an anti-flyer, you're definitely gonna be able to like see that from the opposite side. But an interesting thing that I've been seeing a lot of people talk about is leaving out and making a hole in your team very obvious, like running a team that's like super weak to the flying types. Let's say you run like 4 bug type Pokemon, and then you run 1 anti-flyer. Of course, the opponent there is just gonna see, holy cow, if I use my flying type Pokemon here, I'm just gonna have the best chances possible of hitting his lead Pokemon for super duper damage. And then if you flip the script on them and you use your anti-flyer to lead, they're obviously gonna fall into your trap. Now, it is quite obvious once you like get through round 1, so you kind of do have to possibly play with a crutch for the other 2 matches if it doesn't go your way. But it's a very interesting concept and a very cool mind game. I always love the mind game aspect. So that is actually going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. I probably will not do a deep dive today, specifically the day that this video goes up, and that's just because we'll talk about that in another video. But if you do have ideas for a deep dive, make sure you drop them down below, because tomorrow, over the weekend it was kind of crazy, but tomorrow this is actually what we have coming up, and I have no idea what it is. I've put them in the votes, but I couldn't tell you what it is. But anyways, that is actually going to be it. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching, of course. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you can do that. But if you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.